Hello, everybody. Back again with another edition of Chamber TV. Today is episode number 167, and we're continuing our conversation with all the candidates that are seeking public office in Rhode Island. And today we are continuing our discussions with those candidates that are seeking to succeed Representative Jim Langevin in Congress. And today we have the honor of speaking to former Cranston Mayor Allan Fung, who is running for Congress as a Republican in the 2nd Congressional District. So how are you today, Mayor? Nice to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Laurie. Very nice to be back here with the chamber and all its members, all about, virtually, but it's still nice to, connect back and get a chance to talk to everyone.
Fantastic. So these are meant to be very casual interviews where we're chatting with the candidates about, what's inspiring them to seek public office, what the key issues you're seeing when you're out on the campaign trail, what would you want to focus on if elected to Congress. So these are, really meant to be just sort of get to know you type of thing, like we're sitting around the dining room table, if it were. So anyway, thanks for being with us. And let me just toss it to you and say, hey, nice to see you again. You are a veteran in public service in Rhode Island. No need to introduce you to our viewers. You are very well known, and you've been very active in the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce for a very long time. So let me just open by saying what is driving you today to think about Congress?
Now, thanks so much, Laurie, and everyone for having me back. And you're right. I have been, involved in public service a long time now, and even involved with the chamber even before my career in politics when I was working for MetLife back in the day. And I want to say thanks to the chamber and all that you do. You're an important part of our community, representing and being a voice for business owners, both large and small throughout Rhode Island, especially during these difficult times with COVID. And in fact, I got involved in public service, way back when, because of just a feeling of urgency of what was going wrong in a community in Cranston that had provided so much, to my family. And let me just take a step back because, as some of you probably know, my parents are first generation to this country. They got married in Hong Kong, came over to the United States. I could never imagine doing what they did, not knowing a word of English, leaving their family, friends, support structure to come to another country, start a better life for the family that they were about to start. And, when they came here, they ended up starting their small family business, Chinese restaurant in Cranston. And when they could finally afford to move into the city, they did. And this city has offered so much to my parents. And back in early 2000, during the height of the economy, the city ended up with the worst bond rating of any city in the country, junk bond status. When I started looking into what was going on, I became angry enough that I wanted to get involved and fix the community because many of the policymakers that were there, many of whom I supported, were just leading it down the wrong path. And, after jumping into the city council and then ended up running for mayor, where, we ended up serving for 12 years, successfully righting the ship, taking a city that was on the brink of financial ruin, turning it into one of the best cities to live in America for 3 straight years in a row, fixing many of those problems that people never thought could be fixed, from pensions, retiree healthcare, getting millions in concessions from unions, turning, the deficits in the schools into surpluses. We fixed a lot that was going on, and I'm seeing a lot of those same problems in our country right now. Overspending that is causing this cost of living crisis that we're encountering. And that's why I'm running, for the same reasons that I saw our city going down the wrong path. We tackled these issues head on. I see the same overspending problems, the same policies that are being put into place that are causing these rising gas prices, rising grocery prices, not being able to get even some of the goods that we want. I want to go down to Washington, D.C., tackle these problems and fix it just like I fixed Cranston.
Interesting that you mentioned inflation and supply chain. These are, of course, really big issues, and affect people's pocketbooks on a day-to-day basis. I've always been curious, to think about the rising costs of everything and unprecedented inflation. So I'm wondering, from a congressional point of view, what do you think can be done? What can an elected body do to mitigate rising costs and inflation when it's really so much more than that, and really market based, and the Fed, and so many things that, understandably might be outside the purview of an elected official.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, but a lot of it is driven by the policies that have been put into place by, the presidential administration, Speaker Pelosi and this current Congress, where we have to take bold action now, especially on certain areas. You mentioned the Fed. I do support a gradual increase on these rates because we can't continue with these same policies that are causing, this unbelievable, tsunami that's hitting all of us. But secondly, we have to focus on energy and become energy independent once again. I will be supporting policies that, while we transition to a renewable energy, because I am one of those individuals that believes we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I do support properly sited renewable energy. In the interim, we cannot stop every type of project, gas project, oil projects, because that is causing a dramatic impact on what we're seeing at the gas pumps. I filled up my gas tank yesterday. It was unbelievable. Another 75 plus dollars, and I just drive a sedan. Those gas prices are now at all-time highs, 470 a gallon. And this is crazy. We have to, start tapping into sources like our drilled but uncompleted wells and start, getting back into being energy independent again. If we take some of these policies that are, can put forward and start stemming that flow, we have to do that now, because the biggest problem that I see coming down the pike is we're facing these high prices now, but what's going to happen, 5, 6 short months from now when we're coming into the throes of winter? Where home heating oil, I filled up and topped off my oil tank at the end of last month, and it cost me over $1,000. If we keep up at this rate, seniors are going to have those difficult choices of high, oil prices to heat their homes, or high grocery prices to feed themselves, or high prescription, costs, for their medications. This These aren't good choices, not just for seniors, but for many families. And there are policies we can take in the interim to kind of drive that down.
Beyond what you were referring to relative to opening up, natural gas and oil lines and drilling, et cetera, what else have you identified as a way to really, try to keep inflation in check? And certainly, you see tremendous inconsistencies in the workforce and in wages. And as wages continue to ratchet up, then that creates, sort of a virtuous circle, if you will, of continuing high prices. So on the one hand, we want everybody to earn more and to be able to prosper. But on the other hand, do you see rising wages as a source of inflation?
Yeah, it all goes together, Lori. And one of the things we have to do is get a lot of individuals back to work. Right now, there's been so much money pumped back into the economy through a lot of the overspending that's coming out through Congress, that we've got to dial that back down. And for me, the spending has to be targeted type investments into, infrastructure, and infrastructure like, fixing and expanding Quonset, so we have a lot more efficiencies for that supply chain coming in and out. These are some of the areas that I definitely want to tackle. The supply chain issue is big. I want to make sure that we're bringing back some of those jobs that are overseas, and not just in the energy realm, but in many different areas. Support the green economy that is burgeoning here in the state, but also, that new blue economy that's the subject of a lot of talk and research at URI and other industries that are here. If we increase those capacities into our state, into our country, there's less of a reliance on the instability that's going on overseas. I think that's going to help also with the job markets, because when you have a job market that what we're seeing right now, where people have to get back to work, it's a complicated issue, but most importantly, one that dovetails on a lot of different issues impacting our economy right now. But making a lot more of our products here, especially products like semiconductors, where with the instability that's going on over in Taiwan and China right now, Taiwan is the worldwide manufacturer of semiconductors. And if anything happens over there, we're going to be in trouble. And so isn't, half of the globe. So this is part of what I'd like to see expand on and help improve our economy, not just locally, but across the country.
Yeah, that whole issue around chip production, we've talked about that with a lot of the candidates. And how did we get caught flat-footed, Alan, on this whole notion of chip production and the ancillary industries? And do you think that the average citizen realizes that they're not able to get their new stove or their new washing machine or, a new car or even buy a used car because of the centrality of chips and the way that they've been embedded into our everyday life? So how did this happen?
No, there has been a reliance upon many companies, both small, medium, and large, upon production overseas and then having it shipped back at lower costs. And a lot of times when that happens, and when you're relying upon economies that can become unstable, this is what we're seeing come to a full steam right now. And that's why we have to get more people back to work making products here in our country. This is something that's not new. It's something I've talked about. Chamber members have talked about, that onshoring back of some of the products that need to be made here. But dovetailing with that, we have to have the appropriate infrastructure. But a second part of that infrastructure that's important, because I'd love to see, like I mentioned before, that expansion at Quonset, along with different areas with the bay, up and down the bay, so that there can be that transportation of a lot of the goods, back and forth as we're making here. But another important issue that comes along with it is cybersecurity. We have to have investments in cyber, because we cannot have our local supply chain disrupted by any type of whether it's foreign forces or just hackers coming in, and we've seen too much of that. So it's a big problem that's grown over time, but one that we have to address now. And that's why I am supportive of that, bipartisan CHIPS Act, because one of the things that people have known about me during my time as mayor or even my time governing, we have to work together on complicated issues to get things done for the betterment of not just our local communities, our state, but our country. And getting a lot of those manufacturing, whether it's of chips or other products, back into our country, or even more stable regimes, will help.
What are your thoughts on the tone and tenor of Congress these days? And you mentioned, the ability to work across the aisle and to be collegial and to come together on issues that are, truly bipartisan. But that all sounds very easy. But if we look at, what's happening in Congress and has been happening over the course of the last few years, one would say, like, why would anyone want to go down and subject themselves to that degree of real warfare, if you will, verbal warfare?
And it has become too much of the extremes on both sides. And for me, if you take a look at how I've governed over the 12 years I've come here, we've tackled big issues like pension reform for that extremely poorly funded police and fire pension plan that had been an albatross on Cranston's books for decades, generations. But we were able to do it because we sat across the table with our union members, with our retirees, focusing on facts and data and coming together with solutions, both back and forth dialogue. And that's the type of attitude I want to take to Washington, D.C., because there is no problem that can't be solved if we work together. I truly believe that. And I've shown that in Cranston, where, we've gotten out of those financial doldrums, back into the black, with good surpluses by working together. Democrats, Republicans, independents, by governing in the right way, we can tackle our problems. And that's where I want to go down to Washington, D.C., and work with, that problem solvers caucus, working across, party lines to bring solutions that are important to our country, most important to Rhode Islanders. Like I said, we've got a lot of issues impacting many business owners, big business owners to small business owners, and in particular the small business owner, which is the background that I have come from growing up. I understand the day-to-day operations, but I also have witnessed, especially during this pandemic, where there's still more need out there. Many business owners are on that tipping point of, it's getting so much so with the labor shortage that we talked about earlier, that they're not going to be able to serve their customers, and to the point where even with the revenue coming in, they're not going to be able to stay open because of all the different shortages, as well as the high cost and the inability to get supplies that they desperately need, to serve their customers in various industries. That's why I want to go down to Washington, D.C., work across the aisle, do what's necessary to bring the right policies and reforms in place to tackle these supply chain issues, tackle inflation, and get people back to work.
We talked at the beginning of the program about your long tenure in public service and the year 2000 when you entered the fray because you were angry about what was happening in your hometown of Cranston. So I'm wondering, today here we are, 22 years later. You spent many an hour on the campaign trail and talked to literally thousands and thousands and thousands of constituents along the way. What is different today in the tenor of what people are expressing to you, what they're sharing with you about their concerns? How does, look back, over the course of your career from, day one to now, like what's different, if anything?
Yeah, what was interesting is what I'm seeing right now as I'm out there talking to residents all throughout the district. It reminds me of what I was seeing in Cranston back in early 2000s when I jumped back in. A lot of people are just shaking their heads that, the economy in such a short time has turned around so dramatically that it's impacting them in their wallets, in their pocketbooks every single day. The fact that some of these solutions that are being put forward by, President Biden and Speaker Pelosi are not even lasting a week, with, even on gas, prices where, oh, we keep tapping the reserves. Well, tapping reserves like tapping your 401k or your savings account. It's not going to last. And people, aren't fooled by that. There's a lot of anger out there with what's going on because it's impacting them day to day. People can't afford what's going on with gas. They're not filling up their tanks anymore. They're only putting in so much money each week and having to fill up, multiple times a week if they can afford it. And let's face it, this supply chain shortage, it's un unimaginable that many mothers cannot get formula for their babies. And you sit there, and for me, it conjures up an image of where are we living? Are we living in the greatest democracy in the world? Or is this Venezuela where you can't find product on the store shelves? These are what is on the minds of many of the residents that I encounter, but not just residents, because it has an impact on the business owners too. When they can't get their product, when they have to, make that decision, are they going to pass off these higher costs to the consumers who are already at a tipping point, or what are they going to do? Or, by the way, the easy solution for some of them is we're going to turn our keys in and just stop because we can't, keep going like this. So there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of concerns, but most importantly, there's a lot of listening going on both sides. As I'm out there, I'm listening to them in their story and telling their stories while I'm out on the campaign trail, in support of the policies that I'm putting forward. But there's also a lot of listening on to what I hope to bring to the table. And that's what's good about it. This dialogue is back and forth, and they are concerned, and they are also angry with what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now by these policy leaders.
What are people sharing with you, Alan, relative to shootings and school violence, particularly the violence that we witnessed last week in Texas?
It's devastating, and all of us, it's such a big gut punch that this, has happened again. And people want some common sense solutions. And for me personally, I'm glad to hear that there's bipartisan discussions going on amongst the Senate right now to try to find some common sense to address the multitude of problems that are we're seeing as a country right now, because it's mental health issues, as well as making sure that individuals like criminals don't get access to firearms. But we are seeing a mental health crisis overall, in not just from the shooting incident, but as a country overall. Just a few short weeks ago, I was talking to the former head of SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency. And he was a former director. And one telling statistic that he spoke to me about was, when he was the director of that agency, there was always a mental health need. And it was about 1 in 5 individuals. But post COVID, that has now dropped to 1 in 3, because we're seeing so much come out from the pandemic, so much coming across from adolescents, and we're seeing that even in the hospitals right now. Hasbro Children's Hospital trying to find a bed for the patients that are coming through the ER because there's not enough resources, to even veterans that are coming back from a lot of their service. So there are a lot of issues that stem, but it's a tragic time that we're all facing, and it's a big issue that I hope to tackle when we get down to Washington, D.C. And I'm glad to see that they're working on these issues now.
Another really difficult issue, of course, is what's happening in Ukraine and the degree to which the United States has been involved in providing armaments and other supplies to the Ukrainian government. What do your constituents, while you're on the campaign trail in the second congressional district, what are our collective thoughts about engagement in that theater?
Well, it really is sad that as a country, we've lost that status, or the perception is out there that we no longer are a consistent ally, with many of these countries. And I am a strong supporter of, supporting Ukrainians, not just with military armaments, which we should have done at a quicker basis, whether it's the surface to air missiles, anti-tank missiles that we should have put into the hands of Ukrainians earlier. But we have to now also, provide that humanitarian aid. So that package that was recently passed is something that I do support, because we have to stand strong with our allies. I would do everything short of starting World War III. I would not support putting troops on the ground, but the economic sanctions has to continue. Our continued armament of Ukrainians have to continue, and our continued humanitarian aid has to keep going on. Because if we don't, it sends a strong message to not only just Russia, but we're seeing what's going on in China right now, which could have a worse global impact. And I mentioned, the chips crisis. If China starts acting towards Taiwan, it could disrupt our entire global trade with Taiwan. So we have to do everything that we can to support Taiwan as well. So as you can see, there are many complicated issues that impact our economy overseas. And that's a byproduct of what I, will bring down to Washington, D.C., because especially in that region with China, Taiwan, even Hong Kong, I've gone there as part of delegations, to China several times. I've been to Taiwan, met with the former president of Taiwan, been to Hong Kong, and just to see that region and some of the discussions and instability that's going on coming from there makes me nervous, and why I want to go down there to tackle some of these global issues on top of what we're facing in our country, which is the number one issue that I'm running for.
Alan, do you think the economic sanctions in Ukraine are working? And how much patience do you think the world has for the economic sanctions? And is there anything instructive that you see? You mentioned Taiwan and China, the notion of, okay, sanctions that could subsequently be imposed there should, in fact, there be some instability in those regions.
Yeah, yeah, sanctions are a great first step, and the sanctions against Russia and their oligarchs, sent a big message that not just United States, but the world is watching, and we're going to do whatever we can to cut off that stream of revenue into, those aggressor type nations, and that's got to be the first step. But the fact that we are willing to continue to support Taiwan sends another message that we have to do what we can to defend and make sure that we supply our allies, including taking those economic sanctions when we see those steps by aggressor countries, disrupting the peace within a region.
What are your thoughts on another topic that certainly provides a lot of stress to families, and that's the issue of affordable education, higher education, student loan debt? The president was active this week talking about ways to forgive certain loan debt. What is your analysis of that issue?
Uh, Student loan debt is something that is having a monumental impact on the next generation. They're coming out with, debt just from college that rival many of the mortgages that, we hold as adults, and this is crazy. It's an issue that definitely has to be tackled. I don't agree with the president when he, sits out there saying, oh, it's going to just be an outright forgiveness. It can't be that way. Students have to have a skin in the game. We should tackle the problem, and I would look at forbearances and forgiveness of, certain types of debt, or the expansion of, some of the programs that we have to encapsulate, different areas of, say, public service that students go into. I would take a look at additional tax credits to help. But the root cause of the problem, and this is where I want to tackle some of these issues, is we have to get down to the root cause of the problem, and that's the cost of education. Period. When we're seeing these rising costs come out, where students are going in for, say, a social worker degree, but the cost of the education is $60,000-$70,000. They're never going to make that up. We have to take an analysis of what goes into the cost of the education as well, simultaneously, to address the problem, as well as how we fund that problem.
In the 2 minutes that we have left, I want to conclude by asking you, have you spoken with Congressman Cicilline, who represents the 1st Congressional District, and what types of committee assignments would you seek in Congress, Alan, if you were to be elected, that would, complement or, dovetail with Congressman Cicilline's work should he be reelected?
Yeah, we're fortunate as Rhode Islanders. Not only have I run into Congressman Cicilline, but also Congressman Langevin and our senators, out as we're out in the neighborhoods. But I look forward to working with our delegation and lending, those areas of my expertise to helping Rhode Islanders. First and foremost, I'd love to, help our vibrant financial services sector, because that's the background I also came from. Not only working in Cranston on our finances and chairing our investment committee. But, many people remember that, I worked for MetLife for 8 years, dealing with a lot of different issues, from life, annuities, banking, to property and casualty issues. So that's one of the areas I'd love to jump in and create a more vibrant economic engine here and more jobs here in that industry. But also, I'd love to be able on transportation and infrastructure, like I talked about. I want to bring some of those investments back, those target investments back into our economy to support the blue and green economy, support higher ed at URI, the great research that they're doing at the university for not only just the blue economy, but engineering, and the healthcare fields too. I want to expand also into education to make sure that, those dollars are coming in to support CCRI, Rhode Island College, and every other institution that's here. And lastly, using my, international background, being sons of immigrants, visiting, many foreign countries, different countries during my time as mayor, maybe serving on foreign affairs too, because we're seeing now we are a global economy, and those global impacts have real world consequences, not just in America but in Rhode Island as well.
Well, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground over the last 30 minutes. We've talked about energy and education and bipartisanship and school violence and the terrible issues around healthcare and workforce and COVID. So, thank you so very much for being with us and for taking the time to chat with chamber members about your views and what's happening in DC and what assets and talents you can bring to the nation's capital on behalf of the citizens of Rhode Island. So thank you again. And any final words before we sign off, Allan?
Thanks so much, Laurie. And I just encourage all the members to follow our campaign at fungforri.com for more updates. Love to have everyone's support.
And if folks want to get in touch with you directly, how might they do that?
On Twitter at Allan Fung and Allan Fung RI, or Facebook Allan Fung. And many people through my years of service also have my cell phone too.
All right. Well, thank you. You are always invited to come back and chat with us. So we will catch you next time. Have a good day.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks to all the Providence Chamber members.